My boyfriend warned, "Change your attitude or we're done." After I questioned his weekend plans, I replied, "I choose done." Then I packed his bags and boxes and left them at the woman's house where he'd been staying. His meltdown when he realized I'd known all along was something I will never forget. Hello, everyone. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 34, and I've never been the kind of woman who reacts quickly when emotions are high. I don't scream first. I don't accuse first. I watch. For most of my life, that has saved me from unnecessary conflict. I slow things down. I listen to what people say, but more importantly, I pay attention to what they avoid saying. And when I finally make a decision, it is usually because I have already seen enough. Mason and I had been together for a little over a year. On the surface, we looked stable. We had routines, dinner on certain nights, coffee on Sunday mornings, a shared drawer at my place, his jacket on the back of my chair like it belonged there. We were not the kind of couple people worried about. We didn't fight loudly. We didn't break up every other week. Nothing dramatic announced that something was wrong. But underneath all of that, something had started shifting. A conversation that felt slightly one-sided. A decision he made before asking me. A plan he mentioned only after it was already settled. And whenever I asked a normal question, Mason reacted like I had crossed a line. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive. Relationships have imbalances sometimes. Not every little thing needs to become a serious discussion. But small things collect, and eventually, they stop looking like misunderstandings. The moment everything changed started on a Friday evening. Mason was standing near my kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone while I rinsed a mug in the sink. His overnight bag was by the door, but I didn't remember him saying he was going anywhere. Then, casually, without looking up, he said, "I'm heading out this weekend." I dried my hands on a towel. "Where are you going?" He paused, just slightly. Not long enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. "Just out," he said. I looked at him. "Out where?" His jaw tightened. That was the first sign. Not the bag, not the vague answer, the irritation. Because people who have nothing to hide usually don't become angry at ordinary questions. "I'm just asking," I said. Mason gave a short laugh, but there was no warmth in it. "Why do you need to know everything?" The kitchen went still. I remember the sound of water dripping once from the faucet. I remember the smell of coffee still sitting in the pot. And I remember the strange pinch in my chest, the one that told me this wasn't really about a weekend. "I don't need to know everything," I said. "I asked what your plans were." He slipped his phone into his pocket. "You've been acting different lately." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Different how? Like everything needs to be questioned. That part was not completely wrong. I had been questioning things, but not because I wanted control, because he had started giving me reasons to. Weekend plans that changed after the fact, names that disappeared from stories, texts he turned away from me to answer, small delays before simple replies. None of it was enough to make a scene. Together, it was enough to make me pay attention. "I don't think asking about your weekend is a problem," I said. Mason stared at me for a second. Then he said it. "If you don't change your attitude, we're done." He didn't say it like a man who was hurt. He said it like a man who expected the sentence to work. That was what made my chest go cold. Not the threat itself, but the confidence behind it. He expected me to soften, to apologize, to shrink my question into something harmless so he wouldn't have to answer it. There was a pause. He waited. I could see it in his face. He thought I was about to step back. Instead, I put the towel down. "I choose done," I said. Mason blinked. "What?" "I choose done." His expression changed slowly, like he was trying to understand whether I was serious or just angry. "You're overreacting," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm responding." That was the moment the conversation stopped being an argument and became an ending. He stood there for a few seconds, breathing through his nose, looking at me, like I had broken a rule he never admitted existed. Then he grabbed his bag. "You'll regret this," he said. I looked at the bag by his hand, then at his phone, then back at him. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I will." He left without slamming the door. Somehow that made it worse. There was no explosion to blame, no heat of the moment chaos, just a man walking out after realizing his threat had failed. And when the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. I stood in my kitchen, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into my bones. Part of me felt bruised. Part of me felt strangely calm, because deep down, I knew I hadn't ended something healthy. I had only stopped pretending it was. The first night without Mason didn't feel like the way people describe breakups. There was no dramatic collapse, no pacing around the apartment, no phone in my hand waiting for a message that never came. Instead, I cleaned the kitchen. Not because it needed it, but because routine is something you can control when everything else shifts. I wiped the counter where he had been standing, rinsed the mug I had left in the sink, and folded the towel I had used earlier. Small actions, deliberate, grounding. By the time I went to bed, I realized something strange. I wasn't replaying the conversation line by line, searching for what I could have said differently, because there wasn't anything to fix. He gave me a condition. I declined it. That was the entire structure. And once a relationship becomes conditional like that, change this about yourself or we're done, it stops being something you can gently adjust. It becomes something you either accept or walk away from. I had walked. The next morning, my phone was silent. No apology, no explanation, no "can we talk?" That told me more than anything he could have said. Because if the ultimatum had been impulsive, emotional, something he regretted, he would have reached out. Instead, there was nothing. Still, something inside me didn't fully rest. Not doubt, more like a truth pressing against the back of my mind, asking me to finally look at it. Because the argument wasn't really about the weekend. It never was. I made coffee and sat by the window, letting the morning light fill the room in a way it hadn't the night before. For the first time, I let myself think about the part I had been avoiding. His weekends. They hadn't started being vague recently. They had always been vague. I just hadn't connected it. At first, it was normal. We might go out. I'll see what happens. Just hanging with friends. But then details started appearing later, after the weekend was already over. Oh yeah, we went to this place. It was last minute. You wouldn't have liked it. And every time I asked follow-up questions, the answers came slower, less precise, slightly adjusted. Not lies you could prove, just shifts. And what stood out wasn't only what he said, it was how he reacted when I asked, like the question itself was the problem. By Sunday, I didn't need new information. I already had enough. Not evidence, pattern. That was why I asked him about the weekend in the first place. Not to control anything, not to check up on him, to see how he would present it. And he didn't present anything. He defended it. That difference matters. I spent the rest of Sunday moving through the apartment slowly. His things were still there. Not everything. He had taken his overnight bag, but enough to remind me that he had been part of this space, a jacket over the chair, shoes by the door, a watch on the nightstand he forgot to take. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a while, just looking. None of it felt shared anymore. It felt placed, temporary, like someone keeping access rather than building a life. That realization hurt more quietly than betrayal. It didn't hit like a slap. It sank in like cold water. I had spent months making room for him, while he had only been keeping one foot inside the door. I picked up the watch first. He wore it almost every day, but he had left it behind without noticing. Or maybe he noticed and assumed he'd be back. That thought made me pause. Because up until that moment, I think part of him still believed this wasn't final. That I would call, that I would soften, that I would turn "I choose done" into something negotiable. I set the watch down on the dresser. Then I walked to the closet. Packing didn't feel like ending something. It felt like finishing something that had already ended. I didn't rush. I folded his shirts the way I fold my own. I placed his shoes carefully in a box. I wrapped smaller items so they wouldn't get damaged. His designer duffel sat on top of everything, expensive and polished, almost ridiculous against the plain cardboard boxes underneath. Not because I owed him that care, but because I wasn't angry enough to be careless. As I packed, I noticed something else. Most of what he kept here wasn't sentimental. It was convenient. Clothes for weekends. Duplicates of things he already had elsewhere. Items that made it easy for him to move between spaces. Not someone settling in. Someone staying ready to leave. By the time I finished, the apartment felt different. Not emptier, more honest. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the boxes lined neatly near the wall. For a moment, I let myself consider doing what most people would do. Wait, Let him reach out, have the conversation, give him the chance to explain. But then I thought about the way he had said it. Change your attitude or we're done. There was no confusion in that sentence, no misunderstanding, just a condition, and I had already answered it. I stood up, picked up my keys, and looked at the boxes one more time. I knew where he had been going on those weekends, not because he told me, because he didn't hide it well enough. People think secrecy is about silence. It's not. It's about consistency. And Mason's version of events had never been consistent. Addresses mentioned once and never again. Photos he thought I didn't notice in reflections. Names that slipped out and got corrected too quickly. It adds up. It always does. I didn't text him. I didn't warn him. I didn't ask if he wanted his things back, because that would have reopened something I had already closed. Instead, I picked up the first box, walked toward the door, and stepped out of the apartment without looking back. This wasn't about ending the relationship. That had already happened. This was about making the outside match the truth I had finally accepted. The drive over wasn't dramatic. No music, no racing thoughts, no second guessing, just directions I didn't need to check. Anyone else might have found that strange. I didn't look up the address. I didn't hesitate at any turn, because I had already been there in my head. It was a quiet neighborhood, clean sidewalks, cars parked in neat lines, the kind of place that didn't invite questions. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, both hands still on the steering wheel. There's a difference between suspecting something and stepping into it. And once you step into it, there's no version of the story that goes back to what it was before. I picked up my phone and scrolled, not through messages, but through memories. The first time he mentioned a friend's place without a name. The time he said he stayed over because it was closer to where he was. The time he changed the story halfway through telling it and thought I didn't notice. None of those moments were proof, but they were enough. I stepped out of the car, opened the trunk, and lifted the first box. It wasn't heavy, but it felt final in a way my body understood before my mind did. I walked up to the building entrance. No security desk, no doorman, just a keypad and a door that opened when someone inside buzzed it. Simple, uncomplicated, temporary. It matched everything else. I pressed the intercom, waited. No answer. I pressed it again. This time I heard movement. Footsteps. A pause. Then, "Yeah?" Mason's voice, slightly muffled, slightly cautious. "It's me." Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. A second later, the door clicked open. The hallway smelled faintly like cleaning supplies and something floral, different from my place, different from anything he had ever described. I walked up the stairs slowly, balancing the box in my arms. Second floor, third door on the left. I didn't knock right away, not because I was unsure, because standing in front of that door felt like standing in front of every answer I had tried not to need. Then I knocked once. The door opened. Mason stood there. For a second, his face didn't register anything. Not surprise, not anger, just a delay, like his brain needed an extra moment to connect what he was seeing with what it meant. Then it hit, and behind him, a woman. Vanessa. She wasn't trying to hide. That was the part that stood out. She stood a few steps back, watching, not confused enough to ask questions, but not informed enough to understand everything either, which meant one thing. She didn't know the full story. Mason stepped forward slightly, blocking part of the doorway. "What are you doing here?" His tone wasn't loud, but it was tight, controlled in a way that suggested he was already trying to manage the situation. I adjusted the box in my arms. "I'm returning your things." His eyes dropped to the box, then back to me. "You didn't have to do that." That line almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was automatic, a response that belonged in a different version of this situation. "I know," I said, "but it makes sense." Vanessa shifted behind him. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Her voice was calm, careful, not defensive, just uncertain. I looked at her for a moment, then back at Mason, because this wasn't about her, not yet. "I can just take it later," he said quickly. There it was, the first attempt to regain control. Delay, reframe, Move it to a different time, a different place, where the details could be adjusted. I shook my head. No, this is better. He exhaled through his nose. You're making this into something it's not. That sentence settled between us, familiar and heavy. I had heard versions of it before whenever my questions came too close to something he didn't want to explain. I stepped forward just enough to close the distance and held the box out toward him. He didn't take it immediately. That was when I saw it clearly. Not panic, not guilt, loss of control, because until this moment, he still believed there was a version of this where he decided how things unfolded, where conversations could be redirected, where outcomes weren't already set. But standing there, with me at the door, Vanessa behind him, and everything already packed and brought to him, that version didn't exist anymore. You went through my stuff, he said. The accusation came out too quickly, and it told me exactly what I needed to know, not about what I had done, but about what he assumed I had found. I packed your things, I replied. That's all. He stared at me, searching for regret or hesitation. There was nothing. You're acting like you knew everything, he said. There it was. Not denial, not explanation. A shift from what happened to what I knew. I held his gaze. I knew enough. The hallway seemed to tighten around us. Vanessa's posture changed. Subtle, but enough. She wasn't just watching a conversation anymore. She was watching something fall apart. Mason finally reached out and took the box, slowly, like the weight of it had changed. I think you're overthinking this, he said. One last attempt. I shook my head. I don't think I am. I stepped back. I'll bring the rest up. And before he could respond, I turned, walked back down the hallway, and left him standing there between two realities he could no longer keep separate. I didn't rush. That was the part people never understand. They expect moments like this to be fast, emotional, reactive, but nothing about this felt rushed. I went back down the stairs, stepped into the quiet street, and opened my trunk again. The rest of his things were still there, neatly packed and ordered. Contained, just like everything else he had tried to keep separate. I picked up the second box and paused. Not to reconsider, just to breathe. Because even when you know you're doing the right thing, your heart still has to survive the doing. When I walked back into the building, the air felt heavier, not because anything had changed physically, but because now everyone involved understood that something had. The door was still open when I reached it. Mason hadn't closed it. He was standing in the same place, the first box now sitting on the floor beside him. Vanessa had moved slightly closer, but not enough to fully step into the space between us. She was still trying to figure out where she stood in all of this. And Mason was trying to figure out how much she had already understood. I placed the second box next to the first, carefully, like it mattered, because it did, not to him, to me. You didn't have to come back, he said. His voice had changed, less sharp, more measured. That wasn't calm. That was adjustment. I know, I replied, but I prefer finishing things properly. That word, properly, landed. Because what I was doing wasn't chaotic, it wasn't emotional, it was precise. And precision removes space for reinterpretation. She's overreacting, Mason said suddenly, turning slightly toward Vanessa. There it was. Now he wasn't talking to me. He was managing her, the narrative. The version of events that would allow him to keep control of at least one side of this. I'm not, I said quietly. I didn't raise my voice, didn't step forward, didn't challenge him directly, because I didn't need to. The truth was already visible. Vanessa looked at him, not at me. That told me everything. What's going on? She asked. Simple, direct. And this time, he didn't answer immediately. That delay was the crack. Because people who are telling the truth don't need time to decide how to say it. They just say it. But Mason was choosing, editing, trying to find a version that wouldn't collapse under its own weight. It's nothing, he said finally. And even as he said it, I saw it register on Vanessa's face that it wasn't. You left some things, I said. Simple, neutral, final. For a moment, no one moved. The hallway, the open door, the boxes at his feet, everything felt balanced on something that had already tipped. Then he looked at me again, really looked this time, not like someone trying to win an argument, but like someone trying to understand how he lost one he didn't realize he was in. "You could have just waited," he said. There it was, frustration. Because waiting would have given him time, space, control. "No," I said. "I couldn't." Vanessa shifted closer toward him, but her eyes had changed. She was near him physically, yet emotionally, I could see her stepping back. "What does she mean, wait?" she asked. Mason didn't answer, again. And that answer was louder than anything he could have said. I stepped back slightly. "I think that's everything." Mason opened his mouth like he was about to stop me, explain, redirect, but nothing came out. I looked at him one last time. The same man who stood in my kitchen days ago, confident enough to give me an ultimatum, was now standing in a doorway, unable to hold together two versions of his life at once. "I hope it works out," I said. And I meant that too. Not for him, for me, because walking away cleanly is what makes something actually end. I turned and walked down the hallway. This time, I didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't look back. When I reached the street, the air felt lighter, not because something had been resolved, but because something had been removed. I got into my car and closed the door. For a moment, I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing through the ache I refused to perform in front of him. Most people think closure comes from conversations, from explanations, from hearing the other person admit what they did. But that's not what closure is. Closure is when the situation no longer needs anything from you. Not answers, not apologies, not understanding. And as I started the engine, I realized this wasn't the moment things ended. That had already happened. This was the moment everything finally aligned with it. I didn't even make it halfway down the street before my phone started vibrating. Once, twice, then again. I didn't need to check to know it was him. There's a certain rhythm to panic. It doesn't wait. It doesn't space itself out. It stacks. I let it ring and kept driving. By the time I reached the next intersection, the calls stopped. Not because he was done, because he was adjusting. And right on cue, a message came through. "Mason, you didn't have to do all that?" I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. That line again, that need to reframe what just happened into something smaller, something unnecessary, something I chose instead of something he caused. I didn't respond. Another message came through. "Mason, you're making it look worse than it is." There it was. Not denial, not explanation, image management. Not what happened, how it looked. I pulled over for a moment, not to reply, but to read it again. Sometimes people reveal more in what they prioritize than what they admit. He wasn't asking me to come back. He wasn't explaining who Vanessa was. He wasn't clarifying anything. He was worried about how it looked. My phone buzzed again. This time, a different number. Unknown. I stared at it for a second before answering. "Hello?" There was a pause, then Vanessa's voice. "Hi, I think we need to talk." I leaned back slightly in my seat, calm but not untouched, because hearing her voice made everything real in a different way. The boxes, the doorway, Mason's face, all of it had been evidence. But this was the human part. The part where another woman had been pulled into the same web and was now trying to find the edges of it. She introduced herself properly this time. No drama, no hostility, just careful clarity. And within the first 30 seconds, I understood something important. She didn't know. Not fully. Not the way she thought she did. "I didn't realize," she started, then stopped. I didn't interrupt, because whatever she believed, she needed to hear herself say it. "I thought you two had broken up already," she said finally. There it was, the version Mason had given her. Clean, convenient, controlled. "I understand," I replied. And I did. Because people like Mason don't always tell direct lies when they can avoid it. They tell versions that leave space, versions that can be adjusted depending on who is asking. "He said things were complicated," she continued. That word again, complicated, the easiest way to avoid specifics. I looked out through the windshield. Cars passing, people walking. Normal life continuing like nothing had shifted. "He's good at that," I said quietly. She didn't respond right away, but I could hear it, the change in her breathing, the realization settling in. "Were you still together?" she asked. Direct, finally. And this time I answered just as directly. Yes. No explanation, no timeline, just truth. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time, because that one word didn't just answer her question. It rewrote everything she thought she understood. "I didn't know," she said. And for the first time, there was emotion in her voice. Not defensive, not accusatory, just real. "I believe you," I said, because I did. The way she spoke, the way she asked, this wasn't someone trying to justify something. This was someone realizing she had been placed in a situation without full information. Just like I had been. "I'm sorry," she said. And that surprised me. Not because it wasn't appropriate, because it was unnecessary. "You don't need to be," I replied. "Neither do you," she said quietly. That landed deeper than I expected, because for a moment the ache in my chest changed shape. It was no longer just betrayal, it was recognition. Two women standing on opposite sides of the same lie, realizing neither of us had built it. We didn't talk much longer. Before hanging up, she said one more thing. "He told me you were controlling." I let out a soft breath. Of course he did. After the call ended, I sat there with the phone still in my hand, screen dark. Everything around me looked the same, but something inside me had shifted again. This time, it wasn't just my clarity, it was shared. Mason called again, 3 times in a row. I didn't answer, because now there was nothing left he could say that would change the outcome, not to me, and not to Vanessa. Another message came through. "Mason, can you just talk to me for a second?" I looked at it, then locked my phone, because a second is never just a second. It's an opening, a chance to reshape the narrative, to soften edges, to create space where none should exist. I started the car again and pulled back onto the road. Later that night, I got one final message. Longer, more urgent, less controlled. "Mason, you're blowing this out of proportion. It wasn't what you think. I was going to tell you. You didn't even give me the chance to explain. You just showed up like that. What was I supposed to do?" I read it once, then again. And the more I looked at it, the clearer it became. Not one part of that message was about accountability. It was about timing, about control, about how things should have happened according to him. I didn't reply, because there was nothing left to respond to. He had already said everything I needed to hear, and somewhere, in a different apartment, with 2 boxes at his feet and a conversation he could no longer manage, Mason finally understood something he hadn't expected. Control only works when the other person agrees to play along. I never did. The messages stopped the next day. Not gradually, completely. No "good morning," no "can we talk," no late-night paragraphs trying to reframe everything one more time. Only absence, and this time, even that felt final. A few days passed before I heard anything again. Not from Mason, from Vanessa. Her voice sounded steadier this time, less uncertain, more decided. "I ended things calm," she said. No hesitation, no explanation needed. I leaned back in my chair, listening, not surprised. Because once the truth aligns across 2 people who were given different versions, there isn't much left to hold on to. "He tried to explain," she continued. "Of course he did. He said it wasn't serious, that it was complicated, that you were already pulling away." I closed my eyes for a moment. Same pattern, different audience. "What did you say?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, I asked him a simple question. I waited. The same one you did. That almost made me smile. "What did you ask?" Her voice didn't change. "Where were you really going every weekend?" I exhaled slowly. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from seeing the same question land in a different place and watching the same hesitation follow. "He couldn't answer," she said. And that was it. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the kind of silence that says there is nothing left to defend. Because when someone builds their life on versions, eventually those versions collide, and when they do, there's no single truth strong enough to hold them together. After that call, there was nothing left to process. No lingering doubts, no missing pieces. Everything had already aligned. Weeks passed. My apartment felt like mine again, not emptier, clearer. The spaces he once filled didn't feel like losses anymore. They felt like corrections. I moved things around, not to replace him, but to reflect me. The chair by the window, the drawer in the kitchen, the quiet mornings with coffee that no longer felt interrupted by something unspoken. People assume the hardest part of something like this is letting go. It's not. The hardest part is recognizing when you already have. I didn't hear from Mason again. No final apology. No attempt to circle back once things had settled. And that told me everything I needed to know, because people who truly understand what they've lost don't disappear quietly. They try, even if it's too late. He didn't. And I think, in his own way, he understood. Not in the moment he gave the ultimatum. Not when I said, I choose done. Not even when I stood at that doorway with everything he had tried to keep separate, placed neatly at his feet. But later. When there was no one left to manage. No version left to maintain. No conversation left to redirect. That's when it would have become clear. Looking back now, it wasn't the question about the weekend that ended everything. It wasn't even the discovery of where he had been going. It was the ultimatum. Because the moment someone tells you to change who you are in order to stay, they're not asking for compromise. They're setting terms. And the moment you refuse those terms, you don't just end the argument, you end the structure that made the relationship possible. And once that structure is gone, there's nothing left to fix, only something to accept. I didn't lose anything that day. I just stopped holding something that was never built to last.